Actions speak louder than words. And today, while we're talking about making children healthier, there's a way you can make it happen. The Royal Children's Hospital Foundation supports research, education and expertise that impacts generations of children. And with generous support from the Good Friday Appeal, together they make this podcast possible. Every single dollar is an investment in healthy children. Search the Royal Children's Hospital Foundation to show your support. Hi, I'm Dr Anthea Rhodes, paediatrician here at the Royal Children's Hospital Melbourne, and your host today on the Kids Health Info podcast. This episode, we're going to be talking about the pressures of parenting and how to navigate some of the common challenges anyone caring for a child or young person might be facing. To help us with this discussion, we've got clinical psychologist Dr Caitlyn Gourlay from here at the Royal Children's Hospital. Welcome, Caitlyn.
Thanks so much for having me, Anthea.
From the Royal Children's Hospital Melbourne, this is the Kids Health Info podcast.
So let's get straight in and have a bit of a chat about parenting and how it's stressful. You must hear from parents all the time about some of the challenges that they're having.
Yeah, I think that there probably isn't a parent that I work with that isn't under pressure and isn't experiencing significant stress related to parenting and all of the other things that go along with being a human being in this world.
Absolutely. I've got 4 kids myself, so I know what those pressures can feel like. What are some of the common things that parents worry about or share with you?
One of the biggest things that parents worry about is, whether they are doing a good enough job with their kids, and if they are, supporting them in as best as they can, with all of the other things that come with parenting, taking care of their practical needs and work and siblings and, looking after themselves and grandparents and everything else that, there's a lot that parents have to manage these days, and it's a bit more isolated than it used to be, I suppose. Once upon a time, we used to parent a little bit more with other people and in a bit more of a community way.
You're right, it's a full-time job, obviously. It doesn't come with a manual and it is incredibly stressful. I'm just going to pick up on something you mentioned there, and that was this idea that parents worry they're not good enough. Is there such a thing as a good enough parent?
I guess what parents are really comparing themselves to, and this is probably another, difference, I suppose, in parenting at this time, is that there's so much comparison to other people and how they parent online and on social media, that there kind of is this idea about perfect parenting. And there can be like cultural expectations from the family that you grew up in, that really drive this idea that there's a certain way to parent that is the best way. And what we know about parenting is that's just absolutely not the case. There's no such thing as the perfect parent, and that being a perfect parent can actually not be the best thing for child development.
And what do you mean by that?
If we were to parent perfectly, right, if we were to respond to every single thing that our child wants and needs so that they never experience any negative emotions, they're never angry or sad or upset for very long because you're always jumping in and being present and doing everything for them, they don't get the opportunity to experience all of those emotions, learn to tolerate those emotions and tolerate that distress. They never get to experience challenges and the things that they find difficult and easy, and the things that are unique about themselves. And actually, when parents make mistakes when it comes to parenting, that's kind of where children really get to learn who they are and their own unique strengths and the things that they can do to manage and cope. And of course that changes across the lifespan. You've got a newborn baby, it's going to need a lot of quick responding frequently. Maybe you're not going to always get it right. Is your baby crying because it's hungry or tired or because it, needs a nappy change? But you're responding quite quickly. And as they get older, developmentally, naturally, you're going to want to do less for them, right? They're going to need less from you. Maybe you want to do lots for them and they're not really wanting very much from you. And so a teenager, for example, they might come home with a problem from school and your first instinct might be to jump in, solve it, fix it. But actually maybe what is the best thing for your teenager is for them to try out something themselves and make a mistake and learn from that mistake and not be rescued by you. But it's a hard thing because you want your children to be happy and to for you to be the best parent to them. And that can mean letting go of some of that control and that stuff that, maybe served you really well early on, but doesn't usually serve for a long period of time.
It changes, as you say, as the needs of your child change, and each child's going to be different, obviously, as well. And I'm sure it's a relief. I'm definitely enjoying listening to you say this, but that you can't have all the answers, but that you don't even necessarily need to have them, nor should you have them, because it's about working with your child in different ways to help them learn how to solve problems and do things for themselves as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's really compelling evidence that has shown that, like, getting it right with parenting about only 30% of the time is enough for your child to develop well, become a securely, like, attached to you, so like a good strong bond and relationship with you. And that's 30%. It's not 40%, 50%, 90%, 100%. And in fact, if you were getting it right more than that amount, it might be interfering with their own development. And that's it from very early on. That research is from in infants as well.
So getting it right, if you like, if there's such a thing, at least 30% of the time is good enough.
Is good enough.
Yeah, really important, I think, for parents out there to hear that. And one of the things in particular here at the hospital, which you would see, is situations of added stress for parents. So I'd like to talk a little bit now about parenting under pressure when you've got perhaps a child in your family who's got a serious health condition, or perhaps not even serious, but long-term health condition. How does that affect parenting in the household?
It impacts parenting hugely. And I think the other thing that I find really helpful to talk about with parenting is that your child, it's not just you as their parent that is like contributing to the relationship. Your child is their own like unique individual, and they bring their own temperament and their own personality to their relationship, and other things. And if that is like something like a chronic health condition that requires like a really intensive treatment regime, or even small treatment regimes, can be really burdensome and difficult for the young person and difficult for you to manage as well. So not only are you juggling all of the other aspects of parenting and life, you're also managing this health condition, and that can be other things as well. So it could be like neurodiversity, things like ADHD, autism, like that can make parenting more challenging, and even just different temperaments. So if your child is a little bit takes a little bit more time to warm up to new situations, if they're a little bit more spirited, as they say, that is trickier to parent objectively, and it does make it harder. So yeah, your experiences of feeling like it's harder, or if you're comparing yourself to other people on social media, people at school, like it is harder.
What sort of advice do you have for parents about how they might cope with that added challenge?
I think it's really important to validate and acknowledge how hard it is. And like usually when I see parents, it could be at any age across the lifespan, I suppose, but they have coped, I suppose, up until that point, and they've got a lot of evidence of being able to manage and cope, even though it has been hard. Maybe they are burnt out, maybe they are overwhelmed, but they have been able to cope. And sometimes being able to recognise that can be really helpful. And like really it's about kind of, creating your own village, being willing and open to asking for help and support, which can be really, really hard for people for lots of different reasons. Support systems can be small, but sometimes even just one or two extra people in the mix can kind of reduce some of that burden, and helping that young person to become more independent with their own cares or their own needs, whatever that might be. Like if they can inject their own insulin if they have diabetes or things like that, that can be really empowering from them and reduce stress, and also reduces the burden of you having to manage every single thing or doing things under duress or stress all the time.
You mentioned something there about burnout. So there might be parents listening really feeling like they're struggling. What are some of the signs or red flags that they might be getting burnt out with life in general, and in particular with parenting, perhaps in settings that are complicated?
Just that really extreme exhaustion and fatigue, noticing that you're kind of losing pleasure or enjoyment in parenting, or aspects of parenting that you previously enjoyed. Some parents describe feeling like a bit emotionally distant or disconnected, and another like really common experience is like maybe something really, really small, a small little trigger, like a piece of cheese dropped on the ground or something, like will set you off and you might experience really strong reactions like anger or rage, and react over the top, and then you tend to feel really guilty and feel shame and embarrassed, and afterwards, and probably beat yourself up for being a bad parent, and it can kind of create a bit of a vicious cycle.
And of course, burnout can show up differently for different people as well.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're a parent that is neurodiverse yourself, for example, like burnout for you can look quite different for lots of different reasons. parenting can be more challenging, I suppose, for different reasons as well, like the sensory aspects of parenting and the inability to stick to routine with a young child, and that sort of thing can contribute to that.
And if parents are listening to that thinking, oh, wow, I can relate to that, what advice have you got?
I would be very surprised. In fact, I've never heard of a parent who hasn't at some time in their parenting journey yelled at their child, became overwhelmed, lost their temper. Like, that's just being a human being. That's normal. That's what we would expect. And I think what we know about, what we know about relationships with children and like that security, what's the most important thing isn't the conflict, isn't the fight if you've overreacted, it is the repair. So it's being able to regulate yourself or like come back down and just say, I'm so sorry, I was scared or I was angry when you dropped the cheese because I've been having a really hard day and this isn't your fault. Kids often blame themselves when parents are, experiencing bigger emotions. And so kind of being able to acknowledge the rupture and not just sweep it under the rug, which a lot of us probably grew up with that type of parenting. Just we'll have a fight and we'll just pretend like nothing happened. What's really important is that repair and coming back together and acknowledging your mistake and taking ownership and responsibility for that is really powerful for the parent-child relationship.
And then your child's learning those skills through that experience and learning from you as well.
Yep, that's right.
And what about if you feel like that's happening so often that you really do need some help? What sort of, services or advice, next steps would you suggest?
If it is becoming overwhelming, I'm a psychologist, so I'm always going to be recommending, I think you can always go to your GP, get a mental health care treatment plan, and go and see your own psychologist, engage in your own therapy. There are wonderful online supports that are for free through the government. I'm just thinking about that one called This Way Up, where you do a little online course. And I think something that I find really helpful when talking about parenting with parents that feel like they're struggling is that really taking time to acknowledge or notice that, in their own work and daily life, how much experience or training or education they might have had to become proficient at their job, let's say, or a hobby or something that they really enjoy. And it's not something that just happens overnight. It's something that does take work and learning and help, I suppose, along the way. And yet often when parents become parents for the first time or even the second time or so on, you're just kind of thrown straight in the deep end without all of that education, experience, training to help you learn how to be a parent. And the other thing about parenting is that it's not like you get really good at this job and you can just do it now. It's then your child changes, You're great at swaddling your 3-month-old, but then they start to roll. Okay, well, we'll have to unswaddle and now I've got a new child that I have to parent, and then that just keeps happening as they get older and meet different developmental stages and have different developmental needs. And so parenting is really responsive and constantly changing, whereas at work for most people, not everyone, you do your job and you do it well and you just keep staying in that role unless you want a big change. You just decide, I don't want this 3-year-old anymore, I want the teenager. That's just not how parenting works. And so something that can be really valuable for parents and empowering is actually doing some learning around parenting, whether that be a parenting, there's great online and free parenting programs in the community like Tuning Into Kids or Tuning Into Teens. Circle of Security is a really beautiful program, and there's other parenting programs out there, but that education and help can really make you feel more proficient as a parent and help you to understand yourself and what that's all about.
I think you're absolutely right. There's this idea that we should just know how to be a parent, that it's just intuitive and you just get in and get on with it, when in fact you might not have learnt much about how to do that, or what you might have learnt from perhaps your own experience as a child of your parents may not be the way that you choose to do things for your child. So remembering that we can learn, we can upskill and be a bit gentle on ourselves in that process, and that's going to help us to actually have some of the skills and strategies that might help us, particularly as our child keeps growing and developing.
Yeah, absolutely. And thinking about, your experiences as a child and how you were parented by your parents, what we know about parenting is that's going to be the automatic way that you parent. So if your parent was quite a harsh disciplinarian, or, maybe they were a little bit cold or anything like that, when you're overwhelmed and you're feeling burned out, that's going to be probably your autopilot for parenting. It's like your parenting template. And so being able to recognise that is kind of like an autopilot for you, and being able to make, I guess, a conscious choice or a decision about how you want to parent can be really powerful and empowering. And that might be something you could talk about in therapy or, learn about yourself.
That's really great advice. So, Caitlyn, what we might do now is actually take a few questions. We reached out to our community through social media and let them know we were going to have you on to chat today, and said, what questions have you got about the pressures of parenting? And our producer, Grace, is going to read some of those questions to us now, and we can chat about them together.
Thanks, Anthea and Caitlyn. This first question comes from listener Chris. And Chris wants to know, how can my partner and I still prioritise our relationship while caring for our children?
Great question. Caitlyn, what would you say to that?
When we think about romantic relationships, maybe before kids, you probably spent a lot of time together. You would have had time to go to the movies, go on dates, really have long conversations about work and things, and then kids fall into the mix. And I remember, I'm not going to get the statistic right, but I think once kids come into the mix, it's 70% or 80% of what causes conflict, I suppose, in a relationship, often for lots of different reasons. And I think it can be unrealistic. If you have those acts social supports where, grandparents can look after them and you can go out and, go on dates and things, that's all very wonderful. But not a lot of people or everyone has that type of support. And so it can just be how you guys communicate and talk to each other can be really powerful, being really kind in the language that you use, and being really acknowledging what the other person is doing that makes a difference, or makes your day easier, or makes life a bit lighter for you. And I think even just spending a few minutes a day talking about something other than the kids is something that people say is really helpful.
When we went out sort of on a date night after we'd first had our first child, we then spent the whole time talking about our child. So we had to work really hard to think about something else and actually, talk about other things you have in common, to remember that you're not just parents, you're still people, and that you're still connected in other ways too.
And I think one of the lovely little exercises that I often do with parents that I work with is just getting some time when everyone is feeling when you and your partner are feeling calm and regulated and relaxed, not at a time of tension, just to have a really short, genuine little conversation about, what are the things that you do for me that make me feel loved and cared for, and then what are the things that I do for you that make you feel loved and cared for. And it might be, for you, it might be when your partner tells you that you look beautiful during the day or touches you on the shoulder, and for your partner it might be when you make them a cup of tea or load the dishwasher. And that really kind of shows them that when your partner is loading the dishwasher, that they're showing you their love, and then you can kind of feel like you're really connected across the day throughout the menial, I suppose, tasks of parenting and life.
Really great advice. Thanks, Caitlyn.
Our second question is from Danny, and Danny wants to know, what does realistic self-care look like for single parents who can't just take a break?
I mean, we hear about self-care all the time, and as Danny's saying, even harder if you're a single parent. So what strategies or tips have you got?
Self-care for a single parent is, again, drawing on the support networks that you have, or accessing some type of support, whatever that is, with whatever means you have. And that can be really hard. And I guess, self-care can really seem like it has to be this really big, indulgent, expensive kind of thing that you need to be doing, whereas self-care really can be doing a little bit less, saying no to the third birthday party on the weekend and just spending the afternoon on the couch watching TV with your child or children. And something I remember a parent telling me this once that I thought was really great is that, sometimes when you're a single parent, you can feel you can be spread so thin that you don't necessarily have time for your own interests and your own hobbies, right? So when you're making choices about the things that you're going to choose to do with your children, choose things that you enjoy and bring you meaning. So if you hate going to the park, that's just not something you like, take them to the art gallery or go out and sit and get a coffee, and if that's what you enjoy doing. And so do the things that bring you joy and meaning and fulfillment as an individual outside of parenthood with your children, and just see what that is like.
Yeah, so it doesn't doesn't have to be separate things. I'm doing this for my child and then finding time to carve out that's just you for you. If that's difficult, really great advice. How can you bring those things together? So you're parenting, but at the same time, you're still getting a little bit of love for yourself.
Yeah.
Amazing. All right, next question, Grace.
Thanks, Anth. Our last question today is from Alyssa. And Alyssa says, I'm a mum of 2 kids. One of our kids is autistic and the other is not. How do I support my child who has autism, who does need a lot of that extra support, while still giving energy and care to my other child?
When we talked about the good enough parenting with the 30%, is that it really is like the quality of the parenting rather than the quantity of the parenting. If you know that because of your child's needs that they're going to need practical support in lots of aspects, and you have another child that has less needs, you don't necessarily have to feel guilty that the split is uneven if you're spending really high quality time with the child that doesn't have those needs. So maybe it is sitting down and like spending 10 minutes watching them play Minecraft and really engaging and talking to them if that's their joy and what brings them a lot of meaning. And like the other thing that I like to reflect on with siblings is that sometimes, like especially I often see it kind of come up with second-time parents, there's a lot of guilt around not being able to spend the time with the second sibling or with the sibling with less needs as the other child. But that child doesn't, the second child or the child with less needs doesn't just have you. They also have their sibling. And that relationship is really, really important and really, really valuable. And so they're not just getting their emotional, I suppose, or like their family social needs met through you. They also can have a beautiful relationship with that sibling, and that really is something really important that's going to be beneficial for them. It's a really important relationship, the sibling relationship.
And similarly, I think sometimes if you've got a family where some children do have really high needs, perhaps they've got a serious medical illness, or as you say, perhaps they've got a diagnosis of neurodiversity, then sometimes extended family members are more involved to share the load. And it's not so much that they're missing out on you as a parent, but they're also getting something from, perhaps it is a grandparent, or perhaps it's more time with the other parent than they would otherwise have had. So absolutely, it's not all just about one parent having to do everything, and I think that's really helpful advice for us to remember that actually kids benefit from all the different types of relationships that they have going on, not only from the relationship that they get from us as their parent.
Yeah, absolutely they do.
Now we're just going to move on before we finish up to talk a bit about busting myths. So what I really wanted to focus on in the last bit here is this idea of self-care. So I feel like in the common social media environment that many of us are in a lot these days, there's all kinds of things out there about self-care, things you should be doing, things you could be doing, ways to take care of yourself better. Is that really the answer? What is it that is there a magical thing that parents should be doing? Can it all be solved by, a girls' weekend or a long bath? Or how do we really take care of ourselves?
If you go on social media, there'll be wellness retreats, there'll be this face mask, there'll be this supplement, there'll be all of these things that are going to promise to solve all of your problems and, everything that you need to be the perfect parent or to, be the perfect person. And I think that's really driven by consumerism or, wanting to spend money. And actually when it comes to self-care, I think one of the most important things is that it's not about doing more. You've got so much on in the day. Oh, well, you need to also do 10 minutes of meditation, or you also need to carve out 50 minutes to exercise, but you also need your 9 hours of sleep and you need to do all of this other stuff. 8 hours of sleep for a grown-up maybe. But yeah, that's just not realistic or achievable. And often the self-care is about doing less. It's about prioritizing the things that really make a difference to your well-being. So that might be things you're eating well, eating regularly, prioritizing sleep over other things, and finding time to exercise, to exercise or move your body in a way that feels good. And if you need to exercise with your children because that's all the time that you have, then that's okay. I think sometimes, self-care is really just about doing less, not more. And, if you love to have a bubble bath, if you have things that bring you joy and meaning, by all means, you can do those things, but they're not the be all and end all of of self-care. And yeah, I think that self-care has been really blown up in a way that isn't really very practical or helpful, particularly for parents when you are so time poor and there's so much on your plate.
So we have to be a bit gentle with ourselves, I think, as parents, don't we? Go easy and perhaps not judge ourselves or judge each other as much, in order to make sure that, everyone knows they're doing their best and that's going to be good enough.
Yeah, that's right.
And so related to this self-care concept is another myth, which we sometimes as parents kind of think or feel or hear, is that for now it's the time where, I have to put my kids first and there'll be time for me later. So is that something that you'd say is true, or what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think, you may have heard this metaphor before when you've been sitting on an aeroplane, that, the oxygen mask drops down and it says always fit your mask before you fit your child's mask. And that's for a reason, because you can't assist them and help them if you're unconscious, right? And it's kind of the same when it comes to parenting. You can't assist and support your child's emotional and well-being needs when you're totally burned out, you're experiencing really poor mental health, you haven't had any sleep. So looking after yourself and taking care of yourself is as important as taking care of your child. And I think, it's kind of like, so you don't have to put yourself first, but putting yourself equal to your child and their well-being needs and your well-being needs is going to make life easier for everybody. And yeah, that's what I would recommend.
You can't pour from an empty cup.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thanks so much for coming along to chat today, Caitlyn. Lots of great tips and really valuable things for parents to listen to. We'll put the links in our show notes and hope to speak to you again sometime. Thank you.
Thank you.
Information in this podcast is general in nature and is intended to support, not replace, discussions with your doctor or healthcare professional. If you have concerns about your child, please consult your local healthcare professional for individual advice. This podcast is recorded on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we pay respects to their elders. Kids Health Info is funded thanks to the support of the Royal Children's Hospital Good Friday Appeal.